Welcome back to Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. I'm your host, Lorraine Connell, and today I'm joined by the incredible Diane Sorensen. Diane is a transformational coach, parenting and relationship specialist, and the host of Beautiful Behavior podcast. With over 30 years in early childhood education and a deep passion for helping families break the cycle of blame and victimhood, Diane empowers parents to lead with confidence, connection, and self-worth. In this conversation, we dive into Diane's own journey from feeling lonely and misunderstood as a teen to become a powerful advocate for children and families. We'll explore the impact of self-worth, the importance of creating safe spaces for young people, and how we as adults can show up as leaders in our own lives and for the next generation. This is a conversation about empowerment, transformation, and stepping into leadership, both as teens and as those who guide them. Let's get started. You're listening to Today's Leaders, from Teens to Titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible. Welcome, Diane. Thank you so much for joining me today on Leaders of Today.
Hi, Lorraine. I am so honored to be here. Thank you for the invite. I'm just excited to have this conversation with you.
I hope so, because I am going to ask you to go back in time and share some of the experiences that you had as a teenager and how maybe those experiences impacted who you are today and the journey you've taken.
Yeah, like you said in the introduction, I was a lonely teenager. And in fact, it started way earlier than that. I was a lonely child, which has now come into my awareness. But from a very young child, I had this fear of disapproval. And one of my earliest kind of memories was like this fear around disapproval at church. I had to be still and be quiet and just really feared judgment. And what I have pieced together with the help of one of my older sisters, because I was the youngest of 5, is that my mother had such a great fear of disapproval and fear that people would disapprove of us children, that we did this church practice at home where, we had to sit still and quiet. And we would be yelled at or, even back then spanked for not sitting still and quiet. And so I just always have had this kind of this implicit memory in my body, where it's not a conscious, logical memory, but just this sense of terror on anybody's disapproval. Right. So I went through the world. And so as a young child, I was labeled as shy. And I always say I was painfully shy. I was scared to talk to anybody. I was scared to, do anything that might elicit some disapproval. But that in itself also created some disapproval. Because then in some situations it was, well, people are talking to you and you're not talking back to them, telling them your name or whatever it is that they wanted to know. And so that created some disapproval too. So I was just very confused as a child. And that just led me to just kind of shut down, withdraw. I had a few friends at school as we got into the older years, older grade school, middle school. But Not a lot because, I always had this fear that, well, they'll end up disapproving of me. So, I don't want to be too out there, too visible, right? And so I remember this time between middle school and high school where I was like, this isn't working for me. This shy thing isn't working for me. I am lonely.
Mhm.
So, and again, this isn't really a logical memory I have, but somehow unconsciously I created a different protection. So, as a child, my protection was just shyness and going inward and just not speaking or, being visible. My armor really was to be invisible. And because that wasn't working, that was really lonely. So then my brain, my nervous system came up with another set of armor. And that was my outside appearance. So it was kind of like, how can I be in the world and gain acceptance? Because to me, acceptance or approval was safe. So, how could I do that? And so, what I unconsciously came up with was my outside appearance. What was approved of was thin,
Mhm.
right? What was approved of was happy and not too much, but happy and just cute, right? Cute, bubbly, thin. That was my kind of the armor that I created, cute, bubbly, and thin. So, and cute meant like the designer clothes and cute hairstyle,
Mhm.
the makeup. And so I created this whole package on the outside to make it look like I was confident, I had it all together. And that just, it allowed me to show up in the world in a safe way, or that I perceived was safe. But the other thing it did was it allowed me to get away from that fear, allowed me to get away from what I didn't realize was getting away from myself. And it was building perfection, right? And that is so exhausting. What I've come to learn is that perfection is like the soul sucking pattern. And so I became hyper vigilant about watching people, what was acceptable, what wasn't, to gain approval. And that's how I regulated myself. That's how I went through the world, is gaining approval. And really, Lorraine, now how I see this is I traded love for approval. Approval was my currency for love.
Wow. Mic drop. I cannot tell you how many things you said in that story that resonated with my experience, that resonates with the experiences that we have as teens, that resonated as women. I think, gosh, there's so much in that, right? You were labeled. You labeled yourself. Other people labeled you as shy. And I have grown in realization that when we label, it provides us with information, but it prevents us from being the person that we are because we have this label of shy, right? You were painfully shy. So you had to show up as that person.
We take on the identity of the label.
Yes. And I'm curious because I know that you were a teacher. Does this experience resonate with you? I learned that to manage my classroom, I labeled the students in my classroom. And what I learned upon reflection afterwards was it was harder for those students to break out of the box or the label that I put on them than it was for them to break out of the label that they had maybe been put on by themselves.
Sure. And we do that, right? We just carry on this pattern and, oh, she's shy and she's outgoing and he's studious. And while this one can't sit still and, they have impulse control issues, or this one is challenging.
It's so interesting how many different labels we have for behaviors in students, and we forget that when we label the behaviors, we're labeling the individual, that then it becomes their identity. And you basically just told us the impacts of being labeled, becoming your identity, and how it transformed who you were as a person and the impacts it had on you.
Yes. And here's the kicker. As I became an adult, I mean, I became lost in this identity. I became the identity,
Right.
right? And when I became a parent, unknowingly, unbeknownst to me, I brought my children into this identity of, oh, we have it all together. We're the perfect family. We don't have any problems. Yeah, that's what we showed on the outside. That's not what was happening on the inside. And my daughter, my children are now grown, and we have these conversations because of the transformation we were able to go through, or I was able to go through. But she told me one time, I was so confused. She said, because people out there had their perception of us, and they'd be like, oh gosh, you've just got the perfect family. And she said, somewhere in me, I knew that couldn't be right. And it was very confusing. And so what that created for her was a lot of inner chaos. She was getting information on that said one thing when she was experiencing something else.
Yes. And I think going back to your description of the feeling of disapproval, that feeling of being, looking, acting like the perfect family in your own experience as a child, just naturally translated to let's do the same thing in our family. And it's so interesting. I'm curious if you did that reflection on what was the messages that you were receiving on the outside and feeling on the inside when you would, you know, that fear of disapproval from others and being in church. I mean, I totally get that feeling of like doing the right thing. Never like it's so funny that the one thing I remember of my childhood in church was that cough that you would get that you couldn't control and wouldn't stop, but it always happened in church.
Yeah. Coughing or sneezing. I mean, none of that. It's like, oh God, don't let the sneeze come out. Don't let the sneeze come out. Because then people were going to look at me, and that might have meant disapproval. I don't know. But yes. So what happened was I followed the same pattern that my mother did. And this pattern happened because she was so fearful of disapproval.
Yeah.
I was so fearful of disapproval. And then unknowingly, I handed the fear of disapproval to my children, not knowing, and I remember thinking, well, I'm not going to do it like my parents did. I'm not going to do this like my mother did. And it's like, oh, totally. I did it like my mother did. But on the outside, it looks different. But yeah, the internal patterns are the same. And until we can recognize our own habits and, these inherited belief systems, we do tend to pass on the same pattern. So that's why we are here, Lorraine, and we are.
Yes, please tell me, how did you break that pattern? Tell me.
Well, what happened was I wasn't listening to nudges. I wasn't listening to how we talk about how the universe gives you these little hints and shoves. And oh no, I wasn't listening. I completely had blinders on. And then my daughter, who at the time was 17, it came into my awareness that she was self-harming. And so that experience, going through that process and understanding how did we get here, unraveled all of this. And I was willing to go through my own transformation and see the patterns and untangle these. And that is exactly why I do what I'm doing today.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that your message is that your kids were your greatest teachers. And I try and send the message that as parents, we are the most important leaders for our children. Right. And so, what a beautiful synergy for both of our messages to come forward in this amazing place of empowering parents, empowering families to see their role, to see the reflection, to come to work with you so that they can leave from a place of confidence and courage and self-worth, and passing on that confidence, self-worth to our children instead of passing on that fear of disapproval or that the benefits of thinking that perfection will lead to approval, because that's real. That is something that so many of us believe true to our hearts, right? I mean, I think I was 45 years old when I realized that I could try as hard as I wanted, but I would never get to perfection. 45 years of believing I just needed to try harder. I just needed to do more. And then I realized that not only is perfection not possible, but your definition of perfection is different than my definition of perfection. So even if I work hard enough, how can I get there?
That's so interesting, Lorraine, because I was about 45 when I came into this work. Yeah. And talking about synergies and mirroring, how children mirror back to us, the very things we need to grow in, is what I realized was her self-harming on the outside, externally, I had been doing on the inside for years, and my mother had been doing, cutting myself down, calling myself names, doing all this crazy stuff like starving and whatever to gain approval of others.
Oh my gosh, that hit right to the core. That we see so many of the teenagers right now exhibiting self-harm on the outside, and we're wondering, how did they get here? And that you're not the first guest that I've had saying that my children were mirroring my behavior, but I just didn't see the connection, right? So like, if you're willing to see what your children are doing as a mirror of something that maybe you are doing, that is where we can stop that cycle. But if we're not willing to do the work for ourselves, we're not going to stop our children from doing what we did.
Right. It's the internal work, the internal beliefs, all of this internal stuff that we don't even know is there, that now is very clear to me. I wasn't doing this on the outside, but I was doing it on the inside.
Oh, yeah. And yet we believed that we looked so good on the outside that how could we possibly be harming ourselves, right?
Right.
There's no harm here. It looks great. Everything looks great. There can't be harm. And now coming to this realization.
Yeah, we get so lost in this that when this started, when it came into my awareness, this was happening, what I first came to was, why is she doing this to me? Right?
Yes.
Like, we take our children's behavior so personal that it's being done to me, where I can now understand that our children's behavior, as hard as this can be to get to, it is being done for me, to wake me up to what is actually going on internally for me.
Yeah, that shift is hard.
Yeah. And I will tell you, though, I mean, yes, there were difficult times in that journey, but there's also so much beauty in it. So much beauty. I understand myself at such a deep level now, and I will keep learning that. And when I understand myself at a deeper level, I understand my children at a deeper level, and my partner and all the people around me. So in that, hence, is the name of my podcast, The Beautiful Behavior, because that is what the beauty is, that willingness to take that journey back to yourself.
And willingness to see it as something beautiful and not something ugly and shameful and harmful, that I can't get to the space where I can support the needs that my children have by doing the work that I need to do and have buried so far down that it's almost impossible to unearth because I've also labeled and loaded a bunch of other things on top of.
Right. And we have to be able to slow ourselves down a bit to be reflective and to allow ourselves permission to do this kind of work and ask for help and invest in ourselves.
Yeah. And the thing that I have learned through this work with teenagers is that there are certain words that we define. There is the dictionary definition, but in our own experiences, we define very differently from person to person and experience to experience. Leadership is being one of the most important words in my world, as if I ask you to define leadership and then I ask 100 other people, there's going to be such variety in those definitions that it makes it really scary for teenagers to want to step into leadership because they don't know what they're supposed to do because our definitions are so varied. I'm curious if you can think about what your definition was as a teenager for what you thought leadership was.
Oh, I definitely didn't see myself as a leader,
No,
right? Leadership was for those big, important people.
100%. Right.
Yeah, that wasn't something I had no desire to be some kind of leader because then, I'd have to be visible. There might be some disapproval going on there. People might not agree with me. So, yeah, I did not see myself at all as a leader.
Mm-mm.
Here's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
And fitting in is, as Brene Brown talks about, is a barrier to actual belonging, which is our primal need.
And it's a definition that's different for everybody, right? So once I think I'm at the point of what I thought would fit me in, it's now another thing that I'm chasing. And so fitting in is constantly a moving target.
That's so true. And fitting in really is about being approved of, seeking that approval.
Right. And we think that doing this is going to get us to that approval and doing that is going to get us the approval. And in your case and many other people's case, the more invisible we are, the easier we think we will fit in.
Right. And it's never enough.
Never.
Right? Never enough.
What about success? How did you define success when you were a teenager?
Oh, success as a teenager. Again, probably the same things. Some kind of important person or money. You defined success. Grades.
Yes.
Grades probably is a big one. And I was not in the grade category. That was not a success of mine. I struggled academically. And probably because I was so enmeshed in this, cycle of approval that my brain was just so stressed. Learning wasn't really safe because it sounds kind of crazy, but there's a sense of I'm supposed to know everything or I'm supposed to know things. And I think that started at a really young age too when I asked for help. I remember I had a experience in first grade where I asked for help and then I was told I wasn't listening. So I'd just go sit down.
In first grade, huh?
First grade. Yeah. And so as I went through school, and, teacher said, well, you need to ask for help if you don't understand it. And I got to a point where I was like, oh, hell no. There is no way I'm going to ask for help because that felt so diminishing.
Yeah. That's so fascinating because I think so many of us as adults, but it starts at such a young age, have this challenge of asking for help when it does feel like when you ask for help, you are now seen as less than, as diminished, and that the notion that you can do it all and that you can be perfect and that you can fit in. Wow. It amazes me that we all make it out of our teenage years.
Right.
Give them a leg to stand on and let them know, gosh, it is okay to make a mistake. I mean, I think I fight that wave of mistakes are okay or mistakes are bad, like that is the wall I must climb every time I'm with a group of teenagers.
Yeah, because in perfectionism, there is no room for mistake.
Right. And as leaders, we are taught that you shouldn't make mistakes. If you are a leader, if you have gotten to the point where you have gotten a title establishing you as quote unquote a leader, then you need to be perfect. You need to be above the ability to make a mistake. And so why is it a surprise to us that we believe that making mistakes isn't bad, right? Like,
Right. And here's the thing that it's inevitable, right? We're being asked to do the impossible, believing the impossible because mistakes, we're going to make mistakes on one.
learn without them.
Exactly. That's the contrast.
Right?
When we make a mistake, is it taking us towards, what we want or away from it? And oh, it's away from it. Okay, well, let's make a different choice now.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many things in the world of teenagers, and probably we carry them into adulthood, but like so many things are binary. If it is not right, it must be wrong. If it is not perfect, it must be a failure.
Yeah, it's this, it can only be one or the other. So then you have to be all right all the time and never wrong. You have to be, let's take this into, sometimes lazy or selfish or responsible, right? Oh, you can't be irresponsible. You must be responsible always, all the time.
Oh,
Right?
gosh.
Never lazy. What's the opposite of that? Hardworking. You need to be working all the time.
Yeah.
If you're selfless all the time, I mean, this is how we get to perfectionism. And so there is this and. Yes, there is times to be hardworking or working. And there are times to be lazy. If lazy means I'm going to sit on the couch and read a book or watch a movie for a couple hours, then okay. Then that's the time to do it. If we're over responsible, that's really rather irresponsible.
Right. Right. It's almost like, what did you say when you were shy? It still ended up in disapproval for you because then you weren't engaging in the conversation. So there really is no one way to be if we want to be a person.
It's all of it. It's all of it.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful behavior, right?
Yes. And it's paying attention to the contrast.
Yeah. So now that you've gone through this journey, I mean, what a journey it's been. I'm like so excited to have been part of this story. What would you go back and say to Diane, who was a teenager, but in terms of like the teens that are experiencing those feelings today?
I think I would go back to her and just have a really good laugh with her and say, the things you are fearing are laughable. I mean, they're just made up stories in our head. And I think we would sit and just have a really good laugh about it all.
I love that because then you like lift the weight that you were carrying, right? And it sounds like when you were telling your story, it felt like a weight you were carrying. I could feel it as you were describing it. And I know that our teens feel those weights, right? It's how do we help them put the weights down, not get rid of them, but put them down for a break.
And I think that is reflecting on our own self and doing really our own work.
Being open to the fact that we're a work in progress too.
Right. And what about my child is triggering me? Because here's the thing too. We think my child is constantly pushing my buttons. Like, how do they know all the buttons to push? Well, they don't know all the buttons to push. What is getting triggered is our insecurities.
Yes.
So when our child wants something at the store and then they have emotions over it, that is our insecurity. We have a lot of insecurities around emotion, the expression.
So very often that expressing your emotion is not appropriate in whatever environment you're in, right? That goes back to church. It goes back to that feeling of if I express myself, it's not okay. And so much of that message was shared.
And
And
here's the message behind that is if my feelings are not okay, I'm not okay. If my
Yeah.
feelings don't matter, I don't matter. And that's not the logical thought, but that is the sense we get. And I, as a teenager and as a child, the sense I got was, well, it doesn't matter who I am as long as what matters is how people see me.
yes. So, Diane, can you tell my listeners where they can find you and tell us a little bit about the podcast that they can catch you on?
Yeah. So the podcast is Beautiful Behavior, and it's pretty much wherever you get your podcasts on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts and the others. What we talk about on this podcast is relationships, parenting, and building connection. Because what I just explained here was all about, from my childhood up to adulthood, was separation. It was really a disconnect from our deeper self. So, yeah, I would love to have you over at Beautiful Behavior. So tune into the podcast. And then all my links are there too, if you do go over and in the show notes. But I'm on Instagram at dianesorensen.bb. I have a website, dianesorensen.net. Yeah, and I offer a couple of different coaching programs. One is Empowered Living and the other is Connected Parenting. So that's a little bit about where you can find me and, want to learn more.
Thank you so much for this really fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you for having me, Lorraine.
Are you ready to help the young people in your life unlock their inner strength and step confidently into leadership? The new workbook from Peers Not Fears, Your Voice Matters, Uncovering Your Unique Leadership. It's designed to help teens see the leader in themselves, step by step. It's not just a workbook. It's the first step towards a ripple effect that could change lives. Let's turn today's teens into tomorrow's titans. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.